Hi, I'm Christine, and I'm venturing into the world of cooking videos for the wellness program this year. So this is my maiden voyage, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to be making African peanut soup, which is a recipe that I make over and over again, and it's so straightforward and simple, and it relies on pantry staples, so I generally don't have to know ahead of time that I want to make it because I just have everything sitting around. So I'm going to show you how to make that today. It's actually a recipe from Real Simple from, oh my gosh, so many years ago, 2005, and you can see I've used the recipe so many times it's crinkled and stained and well loved. So we start with a tablespoon of oil. The original recipe calls for peanut oil, kind of in keeping with the flavors of the soup, but I have olive oil. You could use any oil that makes you happy. And I do actually measure. I think people think I'm crazy because I actually measure the oil when I'm cooking, but oil adds a ton of calories to cooking. So if you just glug, and you get a quarter cup in there, it really changes the nutrient content and the calorie content of your dish. So I actually measure it, and really all I need in this recipe is a tablespoon. So that's all I use. And then we put in 1 clove of garlic, which I already, can you hear that? And you just want to brown that a little bit. You certainly want to be careful not to burn it. And then I'm going to go in pretty quickly with the canned tomatoes. So I'll explain these. It calls for a 28-ounce can of diced tomatoes. I happen to like crushed tomatoes better. I don't like the chunks in my soup. I like a nice smooth soup. So you could use 28 ounces of crushed tomatoes, or do what I did, which is buy the diced tomatoes because they have the fire roasted flavor that I like, and then I just use my hand blender and turn them into crushed tomatoes. So you can add that. Oh dear. See, we don't edit out any of the mistakes. This is just what happens in a real kitchen. So I turn the heat down a little bit. And then also for some so I wanted to show you this. This is the diced tomatoes I used. And the fire roasted, you don't have to get fire roasted if you can't find them. It just kind of adds another layer of flavor to the soup, which only has a few ingredients. So it's a nice little boost to the flavor, but regular canned tomatoes that aren't fire roasted would be fine too. Then to really punch up the flavor, a whole can of tomato paste goes in. And tomatoes have been cooked for a really long time, and a lot of the waters come out of them, so it really concentrates the flavor. And if you've heard of the term umami, which gets talked about in science circles as the other taste that we can detect on our tongue besides salty, sweet, bitter, and sour. And usually it comes from a very short list of foods, and tomato paste is one of those foods that seems to give foods or recipes a really rich, deep flavor. Parmesan cheese has umami, mushrooms have umami, miso, things like that. So just that simple addition of the tomato paste adds a lot of flavor here. And then, I don't know if it's a secret ingredient, but it's an exciting ingredient, is a half a cup of peanut butter. So that goes right in, and that combination of tomatoes and peanuts is the African influence, so that's why it's called African peanut soup. And I do want to talk about peanut butter for a second. Oh, and we'll get you guys will see all the boiling and spraying of tomatoes from the overhead camera. I forgot about that. So the peanut butter I would recommend would be a natural peanut butter. And so that would be like Adam's Natural, or the Kirkland brand is also natural, which just means it's peanuts and salt, and they don't add any sugar or hydrogenated fats. It's just peanuts and salt, which is all nut butter should really be. So especially if your family likes, the regular brands like Jif and Skippy, you could certainly use those in here if that's what you have. But this would be a great recipe to try a natural peanut butter in, because your family's not going to know the difference. The texture they aren't going to be looking for that very specific smooth texture like on a sandwich or something. And the peanut butter is a nice way to add some richness, some healthy fat, and a real creaminess to it, and it also adds some plant protein, which is fantastic. The original recipe calls for 4 cups of chicken broth, and I'm using vegetable broth. I'm trying to make this all plant-based. You may not want to add all of it, so you can start with half and see how you feel about the consistency. And then I'm going to add a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, which is another cool, low-calorie way to add a bunch of flavor. And then the original recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of salt, which is a lot, and I've made it very, very successfully with 1 teaspoon of salt. So I cut the salt in half, and it's still, there's salt in the peanut butter, there's salt in the canned tomato products, there's salt in the broth, so you absolutely don't need 2 teaspoons of salt. So I'm just going to do 1 teaspoon of salt, and again, I absolutely measure it. I don't want to just eye that. And then you basically let this simmer for about 20 minutes just to develop the flavors. That's really all it takes, so it's a very quick weeknight meal. The original recipe says to add rice at this point and let it cook in the tomato and the peanut butter flavors. I happen to have some leftover rice, and I just prefer it that way, so I make the soup separate and then I throw some rice and peanuts on at the end for more body and texture. So I'm going to let it cook, and then when we come back, I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Okay, it's time to serve up our soup. It has been simmering away for about 20 minutes, and one thing I forgot to tell you was that it does need to simmer covered. So you'll want to bring it up to a boil or a simmer and then put the lid on and turn the heat down so that it can kind of simmer gently. So I happen to have these handy dandy ladles that actually have measurements on them. So this is 3/4 of a cup, and I've got different sizes of them. So I care about portion size like a nerd. You don't need to worry about that. So if you remember, I didn't put in all the broth, and certainly if you do the rice option where you put the uncooked rice in the pan, you'll definitely want to use all the broth because it's going to need to soak some of that up. But since I didn't do that, and I used about a half of the broth or a little more, I'm really happy with the consistency. It's thick, but not too thick. I don't know, it's just really velvety and lovely. And then these are some of them, you can just hook them on the side. Okay, I'm just going to move this out of the way so you can see me finish up the soup. So to finish it off, I'm going to put in some already cooked rice, and in this case I had some leftover rice mixed with quinoa. So it is white rice, but the quinoa is a whole grain, so when you mix them together, it's kind of a nice compromise. You get the texture that people are familiar with white rice, but you get a little bit more protein and fiber from mixing it with quinoa. So I have a little mix here. I'm going to just spoon that in. And then I have some chopped peanuts. And then if you were being really fancy, you could certainly add like some chopped parsley or chopped basil or green onions or something. And then I think it makes a nice meal. I've got a couple pieces of baguette with some cheese. It's great with mozzarella or sharp cheddar, and then some grapes. The flavors all work really nicely. It's a really hearty lunch or a hearty dinner. And in case you haven't noticed, this is a plant-based meal. The only animal food that we used was the cheese, and you certainly, if you wanted it to be vegan, you wouldn't have to do that. But this is a really nice, high-protein, satisfying, hearty meal that is based almost entirely on plant foods. So if you decide to try it, I hope you like it. Thanks. You have to edit that. That's fine. All right, so this has been simmering away for about 20 minutes, and what I forgot to tell you last time was to put the lid on it, so you'll... Sorry. That's so bad that I did that. We need to start over. Hi, I'm Christine, and I'm gonna try... So you can add that. Oh dear. See, we don't edit out any of the mistakes. This is just what happens in a real kitchen, so.